On a bitterly cold morning in January 1983, in the shadows of Seoul's Homa Mountain, a group of children's playtime turned into a discovery that would haunt a nation. They weren't looking for trouble. They were just trying to find a soft spot to rest. But when they brushed aside a blanket of crisp, golden leaves, they found a woman's body. This is the story of a murder that seemed straightforward, but hid a darkness so profound it threatened to unravel the very fabric of justice. It's the story of Kim Kyung-hee, a 24-year-old runaway mother seeking a new life, and Lee Dong-sik, the award-winning photographer who saw her not as a person, but as the ultimate subject for his art. The scene on Homa Mountain was bizarrely pristine. The victim, Kim Kyung-hee, lay naked with no visible wounds. The cold had preserved her. She'd been dead for nearly a month. There were no signs of a struggle. It was as if she'd simply lain down among the leaves and gone to sleep. Kim's life was one of quiet desperation. She'd fled an abusive, alcoholic husband and her 2 young sons in the countryside, coming to Seoul for a fresh start. With few skills, she found work at a barbershop in the Garekdong district, a place locals whispered offered more than just haircuts. She was invisible, vulnerable, the perfect target. The police, led by Detective Seo Gaiman, quickly traced Kim's last known contact, a regular customer at the barbershop. A middle-aged man who always carried an expensive camera. A man who told Kim she had the look of a model. His name was Lee Dong-sik. When detectives knocked on his door, Lee was cooperative, even proud. He introduced himself as a photographer, a plumber by trade but an artist by passion. He showed them his portfolio. The images were deeply unsettling. Stark, morbid portraits of women in disturbing scenarios. Staged scenes of death. But it was legal. Shocking art, perhaps, but not evidence of a crime. Then, Detective Seo noticed Lee subtly tried to slide one picture away. Seo seized it. It showed a woman in a gray skirt and brown boots, lying on a bed of forest leaves. Her face was turned, but the clothing was identified by Kim's boyfriend. It was hers. This was the break. A search of Lee's apartment revealed his true, meticulous nature. Detective Seo's intuition led him to a bedroom wall that sounded hollow. Behind a freshly painted panel, they found a hidden compartment. Inside were 21 photographs, all of Kim Kyung-hee, all in that gray skirt on those leaves. But these weren't static portraits. They were a sequence. And in them, you could see the woman's expression change from discomfort to agony to a terrifying blankness. Lee had a story. He claimed it was all an act. He'd hired Kim to model, to pretend to be dying for his art. He said he left her there, alive, and she must have killed herself. But the police had a body, and an autopsy revealed a horrifying cause of death. Potassium cyanide poisoning. Now the narrative shifted. The police believed Lee had tricked Kim into taking poisoned cold medicine on that mountain, and then calmly photographed her death throes. But they had a problem. Legally, how could they prove the photos weren't just a macabre acting job? How could they prove she was dying and not just performing? They turned to the only evidence they had. The photographs themselves. They brought in Professor Hong Sun-kun, a photography and anatomy expert. And what he pointed out was a detail so small, so biological, it became the linchpin of the entire case. He explained that when a living person is cold or under stress, tiny muscles at the base of each hair, called erector pili, contract, making the hair stand on end. In a corpse, those muscles relax. The hair lies flat. The police, under a microscope, sequenced the 21 photographs. In the early shots, the fine hairs on Kim's arms were erect. By the 15th frame, they had begun to settle. By the 16th, they were completely flat. Lee Dong-sik hadn't just photographed a woman acting dead. He had documented the precise moment life left her body. He had filmed a murder in still frames. Confronted with this irrefutable scientific evidence ripped from his own images, Lee's facade crumbled. His story changed, then changed again, from an acting job to an accidental strangulation during a lover's quarrel. But the forensics didn't lie. Only the poison did. In the end, Lee Dong-sik revealed his true motive. It wasn't rage or jealousy. It was a warped artistic pursuit. He reportedly told investigators with chilling detachment that witnessing a human die was the ultimate form of art, that these photographs were his masterpiece. Lee Dong-sik was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. He was executed by hanging in May 1986. But the story doesn't end there. Because during the investigation, police found more than just the photos of Kim Kyung-hee. They found hundreds of other disturbing images. They found a notebook with a list of over 20 other women's names. They learned his ex-wife had vanished years before, after he'd coerced her into similar photos. Detective Seo wanted to investigate. He believed Lee was a serial predator who had been practicing his art for years. But in the 1980s, South Korea was preparing to step onto the world stage, hosting the 1988 Olympics. The government was intensely image-conscious. A scandal about a serial killer photographer. It was a narrative the authorities refused to develop. Pressure came from the highest levels to close the case. To let Lee Dong-sik's death be the final period. The notebook, the other photographs, the list of names. They were sealed away, labeled morbid clutter. So we are left with two unresolved pictures. The first is the official one. A single solved murder, justice served. A monster executed. The second is the darker, undeveloped negative. It suggests a man who used his trade as a plumber to gain access to vulnerable women, and his art as a photographer to immortalize their suffering. It hints at a possible series of victims whose stories were buried, not under leaves on a mountain, but under bureaucracy and national pride. Kim Kyung-hee's murder was solved by a microscopic detail in a photograph. But the full truth of Lee Dong-sik's crimes may forever remain out of focus.